been teaching ATIP since 1992. I've been teaching at a university level since 1978. And I would tell you, and I'm not exaggerating, that, you know, in this era, Western is cutting back on resources in the College of Arts and Sciences. And they came down with a woeful decision that said the English department, and I don't just mean the ATIP English, I mean the English department of Western could have only one teacher. I would select Becky Cooper. That's how much I think about her work. And so you all may not realize how blessed you are, but perhaps hearing me spout today, you'll already start realizing how blessed you are. But we're going to take up a topic that is near and dear to my heart. I did my MA thesis on the Romantics, and it's something that I don't get to teach as much these days. I live in the Honors College, and they allowed me to create my own courses, and so I teach a trilogy of courses that combine music and literature, politics and culture. One's on the Harlem Renaissance, and I call that Jazz Blues in the Harlem Renaissance, and I teach a course called Civil Rights and Jazz, and I teach the final component of the trilogy is called Vietnam and Rock. And beginning next year, I'm also going to be adding a different course that is on utopian and dystopian fiction and film. They don't know it yet, but it's also going to be a multi-part. We'll do sort of the classic early stuff from Moore to Orwell probably, and then I'm going to have a part two that will be mostly postmodern. This is a kind of a bizarre moment in my career to be doing this, but I'm not dying. I'm just trying to ease back a little bit. And I'm happy to be here to share some of that passion I have for these romantics. And I think the largest goal is to give you a sense of the context in which romanticism emerges. I like to think that while the Romantics are surely very different from, say, modernist and postmodernist poets, I do think that they still mark a very significant turn towards the modern world. So we're going to begin today with me offering a few broad generalizations and addressing some of these points and describing what I call the two generations of British Romanticism. You know, Romanticism has differing flavors. You probably are familiar with some of the people that I would term American Romantics. I think that starts with Ralph Waldo Emerson when he decides he has to step down from the pulpit after only serving 1 year and devotes himself to writing poetry and essays. Henry David Thoreau, I think, would be apt person to put in that same category. I think Walter Whitman is a little bit different because I think he's the bridge between American Romanticism and American modernism. I would also be willing to include someone like Mr. Melville and Mr. Hawthorne and Mr. Poe in that same camp. But they are, compared to the British, belated, which is to say that they follow the heyday of British Romanticism. And it really is a rather brief moment. I think of it more or less as these years that I've got here up on the board, from roughly about 1790 to 1830. But within that, there are two generations. And so hence the two columns, and you know what I put as the separating divide, Waterloo. And so, you know, the Napoleonic Wars were, in effect, placed in the era a war on terror. And I don't throw that out casually, because most of these folks were being monitored by the British government. they were radicals in their day. And you wouldn't think that a poet could be so darn hurtful given today's mentalities, but it would be inaccurate if we think about it in terms of this era. The novel has certainly already got some handsome exponents, but I like to say that I think that every culture has its own preferred genre. And so if we think of, the really early Greeks, then we would say Homer and epic poetry. If we move to the prime time in Greece, sort of circa 400 BC, when there's proto-democracies, but don't let that fool you, they're also slaves, not everybody could be a citizen, but nonetheless, a step in that direction, then it would probably be the theater and the emergent philosophers that will follow. If we think about our present era, I guess I would have to nominate the novel as a dominant genre. But for the Romantics, it was poetry. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about, there's almost a kind of family romance quality to this story, as you'll hear shortly. So I want to talk a little bit about these folks and touch on a few key points, and then we will turn to the poems. I'm going to start with Coleridge and tackle a couple of his poems, and then I would like to do Wordsworth's Tintern Abbey, and we'll see how much time remains. I have others I can pull out should we have the time. Yesterday rather, I didn't even quite finish Tintern Abbey. So my wife likes to say I'm a variation on the name Wordsworth, except my name is Words. All right, who knows who William Godwin is? Wouldn't expect. Double jeopardy if you get it, double points. All right, so we're going to start here with these first two figures, and they are not poets, but they are profoundly influential people. And they just happen to be the parents of Mary Shelley. And so, in a way, there's a kind of interesting continuity. Now, Godwin was a philosopher. His most famous work was called An Inquiry into Political Justice. And Mary Wollstonecraft is certainly one of the key feminist figures before that term was being used. She is an exceptionally interesting woman, and yet, alas, her life was cut short tragically.